Well, as you all might know, my name is Marijn Poels. Pretty hard to pronounce for Canadians, but some of them do very well actually. I'm an independent documentary, born in a very little village, agricultural village in the Netherlands, and nowadays living in Berlin in Germany with a German wife and a 5-year-old son. The past 9 years I worked non-stop for several foundations, TV stations, cinemas, bigger NGOs, mainly focusing on human rights and international development, international cooperation. And I did very well. I made in the last 9 years over 50 documentaries. Well, I traveled the world many times. And I must say I traveled to the most beautiful places on earth. But I traveled the darkest corners as well, to poverty, hunger, conflict zones, war zones. And I remember one thing, that in the beginning of my career, somewhere in the Middle East, I met a colleague journalist, was a veteran journalist, and he told me, the more you see of the world, the less you understand it. And back then I didn't have a clue what he was trying to say, but now 10 years later, I come closer to an understanding. For example, a couple of years back, I was in the Congo, in the Democratic Republic Congo, the former Zaire. And that country is commonly considered as the world's wealthiest country in terms of natural resources, with an estimated evaluation of $24 trillion, which is equivalent to the GDP of Europe and America combined together. Yet it's ranked among the world's poorest nations. It's torn apart by multinationals, which is leading to corruption, brutal civil war, and eventually in hunger and in poverty. And it's really hard to understand, or to explain what kind of a situation Congo is of a country like that, but there are mothers who are forced to feed their children snails. I mean, and that's a big problem. That's the big problem, because it's a country with multiple problems, and on top of that problems, you don't have food. And you can live, I learned while traveling in Africa, you can survive in a miserable situation, but you cannot survive in a miserable situation without food. And that's a big reason for this problem is, of course, the loss land, and that's a huge problem in the whole African country, because you can have gold, copper, coltan and mines, but when you don't have food you will die. And in Africa that's a huge problem. I think it was over 65% of the arable land is completely degraded. So the land has lost its ecological function, which is causing landslides, degradation, erosion. And it's not so much due to climate change, but much more due to inefficient agriculture. And this is a problem replicated all around the world, of course. I think it's over 40% of the arable land in the world is degraded. And a great quote of Australian researcher and biologist Bill Mollison, and I quote, Though the problems of the world are increasingly complex, the solutions remain embarrassingly simple. Political stability, hunger and poverty all have the same root. In the long run, the solution is restoring the most basic of all, the soil. And I think he has a point, because I witnessed it as well in the world, that when we have healthy soil, we can eat our own food, we can sell our own food, we can grow it by ourselves, and eventually paying healthcare, education, and trying to empower the stability. And one of the great examples, wait a minute, again, and again, yeah. One of the great examples I ever witnessed is the rehabilitation of the Chinese Loess Plateau, which is a plateau in the middle of China, which is the size of France, a population of 2.5 million people. And the plateau is generally considered to be the second place on Earth where human beings began to use settled agriculture. And it was once fully vegetated with massive forest and grasslands. But as bright as the beginning was, the area over time suffered degradation and erosion. Yeah. And it's also called China's sorrow. Unsustainable agriculture in these lands has caused soil erosion and floodings. And the people living there, the 2.5 million people, trapped in a circle of poverty. 2 projects set out by the World Bank in the late 90s to restore the loose plateau through one of the world's largest erosion control program, with the goal of returning this poor part of China to a sustainable agricultural landscape. And this is the result. After 1 decade, and they did it with permacultural design. And permacultural is a system of agricultural and social design principles centered around as utilizing and simulating natural eco-landscapes. And the grounding father of the philosophy, Bill Mollison again, said, "Permaculture is a philosophy of working with rather than against nature. Thoughtful observation rather than thoughtless labor. Looking at plants and animals in all their function rather than treating any area as a single product system." And the results after 1 decade at the loose plateau, where that incomes were doubled, employment rates increased, food supplies were secured, and 2.5 million people climbed the way out of poverty. And I think really that is one of the most biggest problems we face today and in the future. And also I witness it in China, that it's so embarrassingly simple way of getting people out of a certain situation to only restore the food security and give them a job on the land and where they can find stability. Yeah, you can. So I think food security is one of the most important values we can have in our existence. Well, as I said, I traveled 9 years in development countries, and I made 50 documentaries, which is quite a lot, so I worked non-stop. And there was, in 2015, there was a time I was sort of had enough of the third world for a while. And I experienced so much that I needed some time for myself to let it sink in or think about future plans. So I planned a sabbatical for a year. And I went to my parents-in-law, and they're living in a small region in the former East Germany, in the region called Saxony-Anhalt. And I went to my parents-in-law, and I fell in love with the region. This is the village called Grunenwulch. I fell in love with this region. Just the simple life, the authentic old villages with the old farms, the tree fruits along the road, the slightly rolling landscapes. Well, and of course, nice people. And I spent my days with meeting people, talking to farmers, and enjoying the community. And people in this region lived from 61 to 98 under a communism regime. And even though the wall has fallen almost 3 decades ago, you can still find a sort of hierarchy among the people, so the attitude of hierarchy. So being an activist is pretty much not done in that region. And openly being against the system of the government, they simply not do it. And the results are very clear. On half a mile distance from the village, the government put 38 windmills. And that's not only that, 3 miles further away, there's another wind park, and it's going on and on and on, and the whole region is full of windmills. And I was kind of shocked to that. And not only windmills, but also very, very vast majority of rapeseed fields covering the landscape until the horizon. And it became very difficult for me to find conventional farmers. And it was once a flourishing agricultural region, not long ago, I think 15 years ago, with potatoes, vegetables, beets. And nowadays, you cannot find one potato in the whole region. So globalization has disturbed the local prices, food prices. And the farmer was about to die. And so the radical energy politics were very welcome for the dying farmers. And they changed our local food security into the production of energy crops. Not because it's sustainable or they care about the climate, but because of the grants. 2 windmills on your meadow will give you much more profit than a herd of 200 cows. And let's be honest, it's a stupid farmer when he's ignoring the money. And what about poverty? Even though Germans like to present themselves as the wealthiest economy from Europe, most Germans are not particularly wealthy. About 20% of Germany is threatened by poverty, which is about 16 million people. The proportion of threatened people are higher than ever since the unification of West and East Germany. And that's a problem, because the biggest need to climb your way out of poverty is having reliable and cheap energy. And Germany had once cheap and reliable energy. We had nuclear power, and we were a very reliable economy. But in 2011, after Fukushima, the people were in fear, and the local government was forced to shut down 11 power plants, which was about almost everything we had. And the problem was that we were in the middle of the energy transition. And nuclear power is one of the cleanest forms of energy in terms of CO2 reduction. It's one of the safest forms of energy. And while we were in the middle of the energy transition and we cut down 11 power plants, we had a lot of catching up to do in terms of CO2 reduction. Nowadays, German households are paying record high electricity bills. Over 300,000 German households are cut off every year by the electricity provider because they're simply not able to pay their bills. And that's a problem. And secondly, the most complex question I had in the region during my sabbatical. Can I drink a... What is actually going on with that climate? I mean, I was away in development countries, and to be honest, climate change is definitely not an issue in development countries. So I didn't know much about climate, and I asked questions. And the questions of the answers I get from the people directly, they said, well, 97% consensus, climate change, CO2, it's dangerous, and we should fight it. And after a Saturday morning Googling, I opened the basement of critics and climate skeptics, and experts were all claiming that CO2, that we're not sure yet how much CO2, man-made CO2 is contributing to climate change. That there are people who are saying that maybe we have too less CO2 in our atmosphere. And even people were claiming that the sun plays a much bigger role in climate than CO2. And I was confused. Not so much confused that there were different perspectives, but much more confused that I only hear and see one perspective, and and that the other perspective is not cited. And I notice among the public the same growing division of different perspectives And I noticed that there are among the public different critics, but again they are silenced by the media. So my biggest question was, why is that? So my sabbatical turned out to be the inspiration for my next story about energy and climate. And I wanted to be a completely independent story, and so I decided to invest my own saved money to produce this film. And my brother-in-law, who was a cameraman back in 2015, we were standing in Berlin, and I got the idea, and I said to my my brother-in-law, when you quit your job tomorrow, I will pay you for a year, and we're going to make the film together. And he was said, are you really? He says, yeah, I'm serious. And he did, and we went off. Yeah, it's cool. And 2 years after, we're still friends, so that's cool as well. We don't want to, I didn't want to claim a certain wisdom in energy and climate, but I just wanted to inform the public about the risk in agriculture and inform them about the different scientific perspectives. Because I believe in the importance of having different opinions to stay critical and focus towards important system shifts, and also to maintain a balance between people, planet and profit. And before I went off, I went to the cinema and watched a lot of climate films. I went to Al Gore, Leonardo DiCaprio. In Germany we have a very big film called The Power to Change. And all of them have one thing in common. They scared the hell out of me. The science is settled. The world is heading to an Armageddon. We will drown and burn. Our ancestors screwed the planet, and we must fix it in responsibility to our children and grandchildren. Well, there we are, caught in between moral depths. And questioning Gore and DiCaprio makes you an immoral bad person. And halfway the film, I really had the feeling I was watching a communist propaganda film with a strong religious aspect to it. Al Gore doesn't allow the viewer to think independently. He's claiming blame in Armageddon and actually raping the nuance of the science. Do not doubt it, walk the line. If not, we will knock you down. So get the hell out of there and start saving the climate by paying CO2 tax. And do not have questions. And why should I don't allow me to have questions? And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying whether Al Gore is right or wrong about his speculations. What I'm saying is that I think it's a kind of propaganda which is spreading uneligible information and irrational fear among the public and doesn't allow the viewer to think free and independently. It's a strong piece of face-melting political indoctrination. And especially the media is very good in moralizing important themes, issues before they reach the public. And media will never write or cite it that climate-related deaths have gone down by a rate of 98%. And the fact itself is not so remarkable because we have progressively climate-proofed our civilization the last 80 years, mainly due to reliable and cheap energy. But it's much more remarkable that it's not being cited. So the media is seeing it as a certain responsibility to silence information as such in order to guide us in the right political direction. In other words, they know what's right and wrong, and we don't. And maybe unaware, but they infantilize their public and creating an apathetic and mindless society. And for a democracy, I think that's wrong and even scary, because these mindless people are voting every 4 years. And what are you voting when you have a low ability to think free and independent? And it's quite funny because in the fields of psychology, it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And that is a cognitive bias. Let me see if I put it right. It's a cognitive bias wherein people with low ability have illusionary superiority. In other words, people are or have become too stupid to understand how stupid they really are. Because in order to find out if you're stupid, you need to have a certain amount of intelligence, of course. And you see, this is happening. Oh yeah. And that's what the media is doing all the time. By moralizing important issues and themes, they take away that ability to see certain stupidity and make them immoral to question. And to be honest, this is happening on both sides of the spectrum. You see it a bit more by the fanatics, the alarmists, than by the skeptics, but you see it on both sides. So I made this film, not to claim a wisdom, but to encourage the people to think critically and independently. It has become a sort of ode to the doubt. And before I started, I wrote to 53 scientists, mainstream scientists, and requested an interview, and none of them replied. And I requested again to the 53, none of them replied. And I did that for the third time, and 2 people reacted. And they allowed me to enter their wisdom. And that shocked me actually, because I was open and honest to these mainstream scientists, and I said I will visit critics as well. And in Germany you have the Potsdam Institute, which are the advisors for the government. And I requested an interview as well, and he rejected, and he sent me a PDF file which were saying how media should deal with climate skeptics. Well, after all, we worked 5 months in the production of that film, and we applied the film to 45 film festivals worldwide. We sent out hundreds of press releases to the press and media, and waited very long, because it remained silence. And I had a very big network in media and journalists, but not one of them reacted. And after calling journalists for reviews, they simply refused. The story, according to them, was too confusing to the public during a time when climate change was under pressure and the right-wing populism was on the rise. And they call it their journalistic responsibility not to give it any positive attention, because it might confuse the public. And imagine the phrase journalistic responsibility, and copy that phrase on the Russian media, and we will write about censorship. And think about the phrase, that the media is not, they are afraid to confuse us. And I think in order to think, you need to be confused. Anyway, overall, the mainstream media was silencing the film. And without attention, it's extremely hard to find crowd, which means no income. And I started campaigning the film by myself, but at a rapid pace, I saw my general left liberal followers move from my social networks, and I think in about 2 days I lost 500 followers. My sister-in-law, we worked for the Greens in the Netherlands, called me, Marijn, everything all right? Are you okay? You're acting so strange lately. And everybody started to doubt, what is he doing? He was a left-wing filmmaker, and now he's a puppeteer from the oil business. So, distributors and managers and TV channels who we wrote, they didn't want to burn their hands on my film. I instead received a bunch of aggressive hate mails and threats afterwards. I was a climate denier, merchant of doubt, conspiracy theorist. I received a phone call from Greenpeace, and they say it's better to stop now screening the film before you get into real troubles. What did I do? I just asked questions. And personally, I'm not affected by threats or frames people putting upon me, but it tells something about our society, that certain topics, climate change, have become unspeakable. So I decided to self-distribute the film. And I planned a tour through Europe, which is Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, and UK. And we succeeded. And I traveled to most of the screenings for discussions with the audience. I wanted to find out how the audience was experiencing the film. And it turned out to be a movie where the discussions were longer than the film itself, which is basically a very good sign. The majority of the audience were very open. They experienced the film as a tool which was providing oxygen to the suffocating debate on climate. But not always. I had screenings for, well, the green activists as well, and there was a time halfway the tour that it became very aggressive, that people are entering me, and because I was, well, first of all, you know, the film is, at the end of the film, no applause, and you literally hear everybody breathing, and you wait 2 minutes, because I think maybe the applause will come afterwards, but nothing. And then you decide, okay, I will walk up the front stage, and then you talk about 300 people, which is a lot. And you say, yeah, okay, are there any questions? And after that, 5 minutes silence. Nobody asked something. Everybody looked at me. And then someone came from the public and entered the stage and said, who are you? What is your title? How dare you to make a film as such? And he walked away, and all the crowd gave an applause for that man who walked away. So it's quite embarrassing actually for me to stand there. It was a good experience, but when you experience that more than 3 times, you start questioning yourself. And that was after the telephone call of Greenpeace, so I stayed home for 3 weeks with the only question, did I do something wrong? But after that, I pick it up and, well, what I noticed in the most debates and Q&As is whatever the perspectives you believe in, we're all striving for a better place. The biggest problem of this debate is that the media has become politicized, and that's creating a gap between beliefs. So imagine the fact that we have left-wing newspapers and right-wing newspapers. That's basically saying that journalism has lost its function. A journalist should not write down his opinion, but he should be the voice of the public, but has nowadays become the voice of politicians and lobbyists. And in the fields of climate, they kidnap the science, which is a logic construction, and I'm not saying whether that is good or right or wrong, but it's very good to be aware of that it is as such. Well, I'm a son of a passionate journalist. My father was a journalist as well in the Netherlands. And I learned from him that we should believe in debate, no matter how different the others are or how dangerous the heretics, wait a minute, the heretics can be. Debate is the key for a healthy society. Debating is a healthy environment protecting nature, biodiversity, religion, cultural diversity, and even forms of extremism. With only one goal, getting a workable solution and balance at the end of the debate. An exclusion of certain perspectives, like in climate change, and groups only creates frustration, anger, and at the anti-extremism we're facing today. As a matter of fact, if democracy excludes opinions, dictatorial censorship will replace it. And in democracy means in fundament that we're activists who must raise their voice and dare to counter the status quo. For those who don't understand it, I would advise to visit Zimbabwe or North Korea to literally feel and experience the values of free speech. And I can tell you, it's worth fighting it. However, the uncertainty is settled. It's screened over 100 cinemas inside 7 countries, received awards, and became a part of educational system. Although the film didn't brought me the income we needed, we have planned a sequel and even planned a trilogy. And the second film we're currently shooting will come out in September this year. And this whole trajectory has inspired me a lot to make another film about the mechanism of demonizing each other. What is that for a mechanism? Why are we demonizing each other? Is this the liberal direction, which is unspeakable? And what is going on with democracy? What is happening with our democracy? And in the next film, I'm trying to find thought-provoking philosophers, thinkers, who are there to think out of the box. And because I think this whole story has nothing to do anymore with climate change, but it's much more to do with that we're not allowing ourselves to talk with each other, because it's such a left-wing of left-right conservative liberal story, and the gap between left and right is so huge that we're not seeing each other again. So I think that's very important film. Before I went, I make another film, first to break the barriers of the debate, which I think is very, very important. I forgot my end, actually. But I'm pretty close to the end, I guess. How much time I left? Yeah, right. I can wrap it up, right? Well, the only thing I want to say, because I want to leave you with hope, of course. I see hope, because in this debate, sometimes it seems, we're alone and we're not achieving something, but we are achieving something. I see 350 people all trying to find ways to break that debate. And I see that mainstream systems are collapsing, and that there is a rise of alternative media who are there to pick up stories as such, to break these barriers. And I feel it among the public that there is a need to listen to that different voice, but it's just a thing of social pressure, which I had as well within my family, to speak out. And I think there will be, well, let's say within a year there will be changes, because I feel that there is something beneath the surface which is cooking, and that's for me a very hopeful sign, and that's a very hopeful thing to keep in mind. And I think also keep in mind that if your voice held no power, they wouldn't try to silence you. So I think good luck, and thank you for having me here.